In the backstory, I mentioned the questions that Adventures of Huckleberry Finn has posed to generations of its readers. In Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain had used humor to address the most serious and enduring problem in the nation's history. Should its readers consider Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn a reflexive satire of race prejudice, an instance of the race prejudice it satirizes, a comic evasion? Mark Twain was born Samuel Langhorne Clemens in a slaveholding family, Missouri, in 1835. He enlisted in the Confederate Army in 1860, but only lasted 2 weeks. Following his desertion, Twain was officially subject to capital punishment in Jefferson Davis's South. After what he called his resignation from the Confederate Army, Twain moved to the Southwest and began a career as a journalist for various newspapers. While writing local interest columns in San Francisco, he discovered his proficiency at embedding tall tales within practical jokes that masqueraded as factual accounts. Recall, for example, the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. When he turned his hand to longer narratives, The Innocents Abroad, 1869, Roughing It, 1872, Adventures of Tom Sawyer, 1876, Twain learned how to situate the journalist's facts within tall tales where they became a pleasure rather than a burden. In The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Twain invented an adolescent version of his own narrative persona. Both Mark Twain and Tom Sawyer are adept at staging scenarios that turn even the most menial and routinized tasks of everyday life into occasions for pleasurable performances. Twain brought Tom into relation with a character, Huckleberry Finn, whose status in the economic system of the pre-Civil War South, white trash, was only one rung above the condition of the slave. In turning from Tom Sawyer's adventures to Huckleberry Finn's real troubles, Twain realized that he had taken on much more than a mere sequel. Why did Twain replace the familiar, commercially successful relationship between Huck and Tom, the relationship between Huck and Jim? Twain began work on Huckleberry Finn after the passage of civil rights legislation in 1876, but he could not complete it until 1885, when all of that legislation was officially repealed. After he began work on this book in 1876, Twain realized he had to confront his own pre-Civil War Southern past. In imagining Huck's relationship with Jim, Twain confronted two key figures from the nation's history: the fugitive slave and the poor Southern white conscripted to the ideals of the Southern Confederacy. Huck, Finn, and Jim represented populations within the antebellum South that experienced the socioeconomic consequences of the Civil War more intimately than any other Southern communities. While their historic roles were rendered anachronistic after the war, the free Southern black and the defeated white Southerner became the core protagonists in the drama of structural racism that took place in the post-Reconstruction United States. It is Twain's representation of Huck's separation from Jim at the novel's conclusion that haunts this text with intractable unanswerable questions. Is the novel to be considered a satire of the post-Reconstruction era in which blacks like Jim were legally free but still subject to what remained in effect a form of slavery? The problem the ending of that novel has passed on cannot be restricted to the conclusion of Twain's narration. Slavery may have reached a procedural, formal termination. But hasn't the institutional racism that emerged throughout the South as well as the North continued race slavery by other means?